Hello, and welcome to LED 3320 Children's Literature and a short lecture on art and the art of picture storybooks. So when we think about children's literature, one thing that we know is that as teachers, we need to share beautifully illustrated books with children because as you can see on the slide, beauty attracts children and that leads to reading motivation. Like I've told you before, this class is very much about reading motivation. In addition, sharing beautifully illustrated books with children builds a foundation for an appreciation of art that will stay with the children for the rest of their lives. Um, One of the experts in the field of children's literature, Dr. Pat Giancolo, has written about the art in children's literature, and you can see on the screen what she says. I'd like to share it with you. Giancolo has said that children crave something that is inspired and attractive. Nonetheless, they will take whatever is at hand. Good taste can be acquired, and if children are to get on the path that will lead them to recognize beautiful things, they must be given those things that are well designed and pleasing to look at and that will enrich their lives. A child can develop an appreciation of beauty through his handling of well illustrated books. And this is true not only for young children, but for adolescent and teen readers as well. There's no reason not to share picture storybooks, beautifully illustrated picture storybooks, with our older students in the schools. So what I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about is some specific children's books that can lead to art activities in the classroom. The first thing I want to talk about is Eric Carle. So Eric Carle is the author of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, The Very Busy Spider, The Very Lonely Firefly, and The Mixed Up Chameleon. And what Eric Carle does is he takes commercially prepared tissue paper and then paints on that tissue paper, lets it dry, and then he uses all of those different tissue paper paintings to make collage. And that's something that you can replicate in your classroom that kids can do to illustrate their own writing. Interestingly, the Mixed Up Chameleon, his first edition of it, he actually did the illustrations in crayon. And then later on, he went back and revised it and did it in collage. But know that students can replicate his craft of taking commercially available tissue paper, painting it, letting it dry, and then using those different painted tissue papers to create collages. Eric Carle is one artist who is known for his use of collage in his books. A couple of others that I want you to know, Leo Leone, who's the author of a lot of books for children. He does collage also, but he tends to use felt material in his collages. And then another one, Ezra Jack Keats, he's the author of Peter's Chair and The Snowy Day. He uses wallpaper samples for his collage. Here's Ezra Jack Keats. This is his book, The Snowy Day. He's the one who I said uses wallpaper samples in his collage. But another technique that Ezra Jack Keats uses is what's known as marbling. Again, this is another technique that kids can experiment with in your classroom. And when you're marbling, you take a pan of water, and into that pan of water, you drop drops of oil paint, and then you take a straw or a toothpick and kind of swirl them around. And then what you do after that is you take a sheet of paper or a sheet of cardboard or cardstock and lay it down on the surface of the water. And then when you lift it up, it creates designs kind of like what you see here in this blue square on the right. But this part of the book right here, the snow, that illustration was created through the use of marbling. Again, a technique that kids can replicate in your classroom. Here's a great one for any age kid, but I like this one for like middle school and maybe even some high school students. This is a book called The 14th Dragon, and it's a story in rhyme about 13 different dragons and how the hunters capture the dragons. So for each of those 13 dragons, a different artist has created the illustration for that dragon. And then at the end, for the 14th dragon, The book changes point of view. It switches from third person to second person. One of those few books that I've talked about that switches to second person point of view. And the author invites the reader to create their own dragon, dragon number 14. So the idea is that you would read the book aloud to kids, and then when you get to number 14, each student gets to create their own version of a dragon. They get to do that illustration. The next way to take art in picture storybooks and recreate it in your classroom is exemplified by Brian Pinkney's illustration. He's an artist who uses Scratchboard in his illustration, and so Scratchboard is it's a material where it has layers and layers of color on it. And then the person who's using Scratchboard to create an illustration takes a Scratchboard and some kind of sharp utensil and scratches away at the different layers to create an image. So for example, I've bought a Scratchboard for my nephews before, and it was crayon, and it had like a solid layer of red crayon, and then on top of that green crayon, and then on top of that orange, and then red and yellow, and the top layer was black. And as they took the tool and scratched away, you could see the different colors. So kids can create scratch boards in your room, but you can also purchase them. And then they can create their own images, play around with scratch boards. It's what's called a reductive process because you scratch layers away, you reduce the layers to create the image. So Brian Pinkney's books are great examples of scratchboard. So all of this fits under what we call visual literacy. It is learning to read the visual images around you. Um, that's one type of reading. And if we think about our current society, we know that people are surrounded by images. So what we want to teach our kids to do is to look critically at images and be able to see them for what they really are. There's some more books that are great examples of visual literacy. This is an example by Tana Hoban. It's called Just Look. She's the illustrator and author who I told you is well known for her photographs. So in this series of books, Just Look, um, on the pages, there are little die cuts, there are little circle cutouts, and you can see through to the next page. So you can see a small portion of the image that appears on the next page. When you turn the page, you're able to see what the actual object is, but it gives readers a chance to look at that small portion of the image and see if they can figure out what it is. It's a way to practice visual literacy. There's other books like this. Look, Just Look by Tana Hoban. There's another author who has a book called Zoom and Rezoom. Same kind of thing. You see a small portion of an image and you're supposed to use the clues there to help you figure out what it is. Some other books that give kids a chance to practice their visual literacy skills. The I Spy books. Those are books of picture riddles. And the author has taken all kinds of small objects and put them together to create scenes. And when you look at the scenes, you can use your visual literacy skills to figure out how the scene is created. What are the small objects? These I Spy books are also great for vocabulary building with kids because they're filled with so many tiny objects that kids may or may not know what they're called. For example, sometimes he'll use a thimble as an object in a picture. And that's a vocabulary word that many kids aren't familiar with. And then you probably are familiar with the Where's Waldo books. Great way for kids to build their visual literacy skills because you're looking at a big scene and trying to find little tiny objects that are included in that picture. In terms of resources uh, that are great for you to share with your kids or to find information to share with your kids, this series of books right here, the Talking with Artists books. It's a 3-volume series, but in it, kids can read about different illustrators of books for kids and find out how they learned their craft, how their craft shows up in their books. And for your kids, especially your kids who are interested in art, this is a great resource for you to have. It may not be one that you maintain in your own classroom library, but you want to work with the librarian at your school to make sure they're available on campus. So these are just some ideas for ways that you can incorporate art from children's books into your classroom. Thanks for tuning in.